JavaScript is one of the most popular scripting language. With frameworks and libraries like React and Angular, its popularity has grown. JavaScript is one of the most common scripting language that is required for a software developer. Keeping this popularity in mind, we at Great Learning have come up with this tutorial on JavaScript interview questions. Since you're watching this video, you are either clearly preparing for your dream job. So before we get started, I have something exciting for you. If you are finally a student or a fresh grad with less than 1 year of job experience, Great Learning brings to you this unique job readiness platform, Career Plus, where you can apply 400 plus corporate hiring companies. Sounds exciting? Complete this video and check out our platform Career Plus, where you can quickly take a job eligibility test, pass it, and apply for relevant jobs. If you don't score well, we have your back. You can prepare from our specially designed courses and take the test again to improve your score before applying to jobs. More than 5 lakh students from 2000 plus top colleges choose us and secure jobs paying up to 10 lakh per annum. So why wait? Check it out and join for free today. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, I want to request you to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so that you don't miss out on any new updates on video releases from Great Learning. If you enjoyed this video, show us some love and like this video. Knowledge increases by sharing, so make sure you share this video with your friends and colleagues. Make sure to comment on this video any queries or suggestions, and I will respond to your comments. So the first question is that what is JavaScript? Now, if you talk about JavaScript, any actions that you perform on a web page, let's suppose this is your web page, right? Basically, when we talk about web page, it is basically part of a website. Now, if you have a website is nothing but the collection of web pages. Now, in any web pages, when you have to define the structure of your web page, right, you will use HTML, right? And now you want to add some coloring, maybe some styles, you will use CSS. Now any actions, let's suppose here you have a button. Now once you click on this button, let's suppose you want to create one new image and that should be rendered over here. So any actions that you are performing on this web page is basically your JavaScript. Okay, so it is known as the verb of a web page that defines all the actions that are to be performed on a web page. It is an object-oriented programming language and it uses just-in-time compiler. That means best of the two worlds. One is your compiler and another is your interpreter. Okay. It is everywhere and all the web browsers are installed with it. Java applications may include web development, mobile development, application development, right? It is very easy and simple and it's very compatible with your HTML and CSS. Now let's move on to our next question. How many ways are there to write JavaScript code? Now, how can you write your JavaScript code? So there are total 3 ways, right? One is that you will directly go and open your console. Now, this can be done in 2 ways. Now, then there is another that is with the help of script tag, right? That you will be using internally, right? So this might be we can also write an internal JS over here, right? And then the next is the external JS file. So there are total of 3 ways with which you can write your JS code. Now basically this console is used mostly for debugging purpose. Okay. Now let's move on to our next question. So how many ways are there to open your console? Now as I told you, this console is used for debugging. Now, how many ways are there to open this console? So there are total of 2 ways with which you can open your console. One is Ctrl+Shift+I, you will press these buttons, and another is when you press right click and go to inspect, it will open up the window and in that you can go in console tab. Okay, there are a lot of other tabs like elements and all. You can go to console tab and start writing your code. Next question is, how can you write JavaScript code directly in your HTML file. So this can be done with the help of this script tag that is used for writing JavaScript code directly in your HTML file. So let's suppose you have this HTML file, which is basically the structure. When you define, this is nothing but the skeleton of your HTML page, which includes one HTML tag, one head tag, and one body tag. Okay, in your head you have all the metadata, that is the information that is required for your particular web page. Then you have your body tag, which contains h1 tag, which is nothing but the headings, which are from h1 to h6. These are all your headings, right? And then you have the script tag over here. If you talk about this script tag over here, you see I have written this script and then the closing script. Then we have the statement over here, which is console.log, and then basically you are just printing hello world on your console. That's it. This hello world is written like this. It will be printed on your console, right? Now to check where the output is, you just directly go either using Ctrl+Shift+I or right click and inspect and go to console tab. So this is how you write your JavaScript code directly in your HTML file, and the console log statement that you see over here is nothing but printing the output on the console. Now let's talk about the next question. What is the correct syntax for referring to an internal script? So we have just seen how to include the internal script. Now out of these options, this option is not correct, right? As we have written source over here, which is absolutely not correct. When you are referring to this source attribute, it usually is like this, src. So this is out of the picture. Now here we are referring to something, but it is written as ref, right? Over here, there is a source written over here. That means we are referring to some external JavaScript file. If you talk about this attribute type over here, it is nothing but the type of JavaScript file that is there. So how the text is written, it is in the form of JavaScript. So this is the correct option. So option number 4 is your correct answer. You can directly use the script tag in your HTML file, and this is what is known as internal JavaScript. Now the next question is a follow-up question. How can you refer to an external script? So here, as you can see, that this is our correct option, as we are referring to this external file, which is first.js, which is some external file, and it is named as first.js, and this is included in our HTML file, right? This is not the correct way to do it. This is a reference kind of a thing. Here the source is written, here the type is written. Okay, so out of these, first option is the correct, right? So why should we write this, and why this is a very important way to include your JavaScript? Because with this we can use this same file for multiple HTML files. That is the beauty of using, let's suppose there are two HTML files. One HTML file is this, second is this, and both of these files want to use this first.js JavaScript code. It can be a single line of code or it can be multiple lines of code, but the point here is, let's suppose this is a 1000-line code, right? Now instead of writing internally for this and this, we are doing some redundancy, right? We are repeating ourselves, and we don't want to do that. So what we will do, we'll just directly go and add in the script tag like this. We will say that refer to this JavaScript file in both these HTML files, and thus we are enforcing reusability, and it keeps our code short and simple and very easy to understand. And this is one of the most efficient way to write our JavaScript code. Now let's talk about this question over here, which is to find the output of this JavaScript code. Now as you can see over in this statement, we are just declaring a variable name as, this is a string basically, and we are storing James in this name. Then we have a roll number over here, which is obviously a number, right? And then what we are doing, we just want to print out these two things, right? We have name plus for concatenation and then the roll number. So as you can see that over here, here we don't have a space and here we have a space. Obviously this is out of the picture and this is out of the picture because we are trying to print out both of these values, right? Since there is no space in between, we are not doing something like this. Then we have name on this side and roll number on this side. Then this would have been our answer, right? But there is no space, so we don't have any other option apart from this, that the James, and without space we have 30. So this is your correct answer, and we are just doing concatenation of two variables. Now let's see what will be the output in this case. We have var @email, and then we have gla@gla.in, the email address, and then we are trying to print it. What will be the output? Will this be the output, gla@gla, or gla, or should we get an error, or none of these? So think about it. If you just recall, what are the naming conventions for declaring a variable? These are the conventions. So variable names should begin with either a dollar, a letter, or an underscore. And in this case, we don't have that over here. So this is not present in that set that we just defined. So that is why there will be an error. That is the correct option for this output. And the first character should be followed by any combination. So that means you should have a letter, a dollar, or an underscore. After that, there can be any combinations of letters or digits. And variable name cannot be same as a keyword. So this is the thing that we have to keep in our mind, that these keywords are reserved for special purposes and we cannot use them. And a variable name is case sensitive. That means if you are using like this, let's suppose you have defined a variable named as error, and then you want to access it like this. So that is not possible. It will say that this variable has not been defined. Now let's move on to the next question. If you observe over here, we have a variable that is food thought, and this is something which is known as function expression, right? We are assigning a function to a variable. So this is the function, that is function expression, and we are then calling this food thought. Now in this function, what is happening? We are trying to print console log. We are trying to print the statement that is choice 1 favorite food. Now this is a variable and it has not been defined yet, right? So we have a variable favorite food defined over here, which is sushi. Then we are just printing the console. Again, we are printing the message like choice 2 favorite food. Now if you observe here carefully, that this has not been defined at this point, right? But it has been defined over here. But if you recall how JavaScript works, and when you are defining your variables with the help of var keyword, now when you define your variables with the help of var keyword, that means these are partially hoisted. That means these are partially hoisted. Okay, so that means this will go up to this before this function, and it will be something like this, var, and then you have your favorite food, right, with the exact same spelling, right? And it will be defined over here, but it will not be declared. So that is why once you are trying to access this over here, let's suppose you have your choice 1 and then favorite food, which is undefined over here, right? Because of the hoisting. So this will be undefined. That means this option is correct. And then you have the favorite food, which is sushi. That is choice 2 sushi. So out of these, this will not be the answer. This will not be the answer, and it will not throw an error because JavaScript allows this with the help of hoisting. In other programming languages, it may throw error. And then you have only this choice, that the second choice that you have over here is the correct option. As you can see over here, we have choice 1 undefined and choice 2 sushi. So JavaScript engine allocates memory to function as well as to var during creation phase, that is before execution. So all of these things will happen in the global execution context. So we can also see that functions are fully hoisted and var keywords, only the left part is hoisted. As you can see that in this example, we saw that the var keyword went up and it was something like this, var favorite food was declared. So the value was undefined. So functions, and whenever you define your variables with the help of var keyword, those are hoisted. Okay. Now let's see this question. As you can see over here, this is a follow-up question of the previous one. Here we are declaring, or we are calling our function over here, which is again a function expression, that is food thought. So we are calling it here. In the earlier example, we were calling it over here, right? Food thought. Now this function has not been defined yet. Will it throw an error? No, absolutely not, because we have already studied about hoisting a little bit, right? We know that functions are fully hoisted. That means even if we are calling it over here, it doesn't matter, right? It hasn't been defined or not yet. Okay, so it will not throw an error. So this is out of the picture. As you can see over here, favorite food has been defined over here, and we are trying to access it over here. So clearly, again, the function hoisting will happen. Not the function hoisting this time. The var will be hoisted, and this favorite food will be undefined. So you will get choice 1 undefined, choice 2 sushi as your answer. This was about function hoisting, not the var keyword hoisting, whenever you are declaring your variables with the var keyword. So this is the answer. Choice 1 undefined. Same thing has been said over here, that functions are fully hoisted, and for var only the left part is hoisted. That is why you got the answer as undefined. Now let's move on to the next question. As you can see over here, we have this favorite food over here, which has been defined here and declared as well. So favorite food is grapes. Now we have another function expression over here, which is food thought. So food thought has been called over here and it has been defined over here. And in this, we have this favorite food, which is orange, which has been initialized again, or which has been with a new value, we have initialized it. Now what happens in this case? What will be the value of this favorite food? Will it be grapes, or will it be undefined, or will it be maybe orange? So what will be the option out of these four? So clearly we know that there will be no way that you will be getting an error, and there are none of these is not in the picture, right? So the only two choices that you have are these two. So in this example, as you can see that obviously now we have this defined over here, right? So we have the same variable defined over here, and it is something which happens in the global context, right? So the favorite food will take up this value. Now in this context, we have changed the value. This is a block scope of this favorite food. So value has been changed. So it will not refer to this variable. It will refer to this value, this favorite food. So that is why while accessing it, it will not go to the earlier context, right? Which was when this favorite food has been declared, it was initialized over here with grapes. So favorite foods global execution or global context value is grapes, not the orange. Over here you have defined it over here again. So that is why for this value it will be orange. So the option is choice 1 grapes and choice 2 oranges. Okay, same thing. Functions are fully hoisted, and the var keyword, the variables which are defined with var, are partially hoisted. That is, only the left part is hoisted. Now let's move on to the next question, which is this function var foo, which is again a function expression, and we are calling it over here. Simple, right? And now over here we are trying to print favorite food, right? This time FAV food. Now we have defined our favorite food over here, right? And with the help of let keyword, this is another way you can define your variable with the help of let keyword or var keyword. Now this is defined over here and it has been initialized with sushi. Now what will happen in this case? As you can see, as I told you earlier as well, whenever you define your variables with the help of var keyword or with the help of function expressions, that means these are hoisted. One is partially hoisted and another is fully hoisted. But when you're defining it with the help of let keyword, they will not be hoisted. So you are trying to access something over here which has not been defined yet, because it has been declared with the help of let keyword. So it will throw you an error. That means saying that this variable has not been defined yet, just like other programming languages. So you will get error. It will say fav food, you are trying to access fav food before its initialization. That is the traditional system that we are familiar with, right? This should happen. And JavaScript made sure that this traditional thing is followed with the help of this let keyword. So the correct option is error. Now let's move on to the next question. We have defined over here a weather keyword with the help of let, and we have initialized this value to sunny. Then we have this function change weather over here, and we are calling it over here. So once we are calling it, it would go into this function, and it has created one more variable, that is weather, with the help of let keyword, and it has initialized it to rainy. Now you're trying to access this weather. Now obviously, since it is in this block, it will refer to this rainy. So it will say that changed weather. The answer should be something like this. It will be changed weather will be rainy. And when you're trying to access the original weather over here, obviously it will refer to the global context, right? And the weather value will be sunny. So the answer will be changed weather rainy, original weather sunny. Okay, it enables block scope. What is block scope? This is your block scope, and this is your global scope, right? Basically global context, right? Now let's move on to our next question. Which of the following is JavaScript data type? Now we know there are some primitive data types in JavaScript. There is no such thing as character in JavaScript. There is strings, right? There's a string data type. When you talk about this bool, there is no such thing as bool. The data type is boolean. And there is no such thing as float, because floating point numbers, your positive numbers, your negative numbers all fall under this number data type. So if you talk about these options, this is not a data type, this is not a data type, this is not a data type. The correct data type is number. So the answer will be 2. That is this option, which is number. So these are the primitive data types that you have: number, string, boolean, null, and undefined. Primitive data types. Now let's move on to the next question, which is JavaScript is a dash language. Now when you talk about JavaScript, if you have to define a variable, what you will say? You will say var x equal to 20, then you will say var y equal to high. This is how you define. As you can see here, you are defining a data type which is of type, the type of this data type is number, the type of this data type is string. But you are defining both of them with the help of this var keyword. Now this is something which is known as dynamically typed. Okay, so JavaScript is a dynamically typed language. You don't have to define explicitly like in other programming languages, right? Int x, this is an integer, you will be only storing integer in this. Float y, you will be only storing floating point variables, right? Or values in this. You don't have to specify this thing when you talk about JavaScript. So JavaScript is a dynamically typed language. Now also there is one more thing. In JavaScript, there is a term which is known as type coercion. That means you will be allowing your one type to be converted into another type. Okay, so type will change. How? Let's suppose this is a variable x and this is a number, right? Now you have another variable y over here, and this is a string. Now when I say x is equivalent to x plus y, what should happen? In other programming languages, this will throw you an error. Why? Because these two types are of different type, right? This is a string, this is a number, this is a string. But in JavaScript, this is allowed. And when you run this code or when you execute this code, the value that you will be getting in x is 20 high. And this will be treated as a string. So type of this x is changed to string. Earlier it was a number, right? It was a number over here, and this was also a string. Now it is also string, it is also string, right? So this is what is known as type coercion. One variable was or the type of that variable was converted into another. So this is what is known as weakly typed language. So JavaScript is both dynamically typed language as well as weakly typed language. So the correct option is both A and C, which is 4. So explanation is given over here. Dynamically typed is simple. You don't have to specify the type of your variable, and weakly typed means that type cohesion is allowed in JavaScript. Now let's move on to our next question, which is what will be the output of this following code? You have var a, and this is a negative number, that is 10.2256. And you're trying to print the type of, which is an operator to find what is the type of this variable. And you have passed in a, this variable. Since it is a number and it's a negative number and it's a decimal number, so we don't have anything explicitly for these types of number, and all of these will fall under number data type. So obviously it is not a string, it is not a boolean, it is not a null, because you have defined something in it. So the correct option is number. So this is your option. Again, the positive, negative, decimal all will fall under this data type, that is number. Now let's move on to the next question. Now here we have defined a variable a, which is 10, and then we are trying to print or try to find out the type of this variable. So obviously we have type of a, and then we are again doing a type of. So this is what will be the output. This is the most commonly asked question. So what will be the output in this case? So obviously we know when we do a single type of a, right, when we do this, it will return a number. But that number is returned in double quotes, right? So this will be treated as a string. Now the next type of, which is the outer type of, when when this function will take this as an argument, it will be treated as a string. So it will say that this is a string. So the correct option is string, not a number. Okay. So it will return, the return type of is a string always. So that is why when you do a next type of, it will give you that this is a string. Now let's talk about which operator does not allow implicit type cohesion. So we already know what is a type cohesion. Implicit means basically automatic. Type cohesion means converting one type, let's suppose this is a string, and we are converting the data type of one variable into another. That means let's suppose a number. Okay. So which operator does not allow this? There is an operator which is triple equal to sign, and this helps us to stop implicit type cohesion. Now let's move ahead with the next question. So what is the basic use of NaN function, which is basically not a number? So this function returns true if the argument is not a number. Now how can you find these situations? Where do you find these situations rather, right? So when you multiply 0 with infinity, so this will return true. That means this is not a number. When you try to divide a string with a value, let's suppose this is a number, you try to divide a string with a number, again this will return true, and this is not a number situation. When you're trying to find the square root of -1, again this is not a number situation. If the argument is a number, then it returns false, right? So since the argument is basically not a number, it will return true. Now let's talk about this question, that what should be the answer when you're trying to add 3 plus 2 plus 7. So this is a number, we know the data type of this, we know the data type of this is again a number, this is a string. Now what will be the value? So it will be, we are adding 3 and 2, which is of type basically integers, or you can say the data type is number, right? And we are adding them numerically, that means we are getting this 5, and then we are concatenating it with the string which is 7, and the output is concatenated, that means 5 plus 7 will be concatenated, and you will get the output as 57, that is 57, which is a string, and it is a concatenated string, not added together, right? 5, 7, that is 12. What is the use of delete operator? So as you can see over here, we have defined one object, that is the student, and the name and the age have been defined over here. Now let's suppose there's a situation or there is a constraint that I have to apply, that I don't want this age anymore. So how can I remove this from this object? Right, these are properties of this student. This is a student and it has two properties. One is age and another is name. I don't want age to be its property, so I will use delete student, that is delete from this student which property, that is this age, with the help of dot operator. So delete keyword is used for deleting some purposes or some properties, right? And delete keyword is used to delete the property as its value. So delete keyword is used to delete a property as well as its value. As you can see over here, we have deleted this property along with its value. So if you try to access this student, it will only show name as its property, not the age. Now let's move on to the next question. What do you mean by escape characters? So basically these are characters. Let's suppose you want to, basically we will be using backslash, right? Let's suppose you want to print this statement, I am, then you want this good to be in double quotes and then the boy. So basically if you try to write it as it is, it will treat this part as a string and this part as a string. Now it will throw you an error, right? So in order to get these quotes or any escape characters, any special characters, you need to have these backslashes, okay? So then they will be treated as part of this string, okay? So escape character or backslash is placed or used before the characters to make them visible. So this will be visible and then they will be treated as part of the string. Now escape characters, these backslashes are used when we are working with special type of characters like quotes, double quotes, apostrophes and ampersands. So we can use this in order to make these double quotes, ampersands visible. So we will use this backslash. So now let's talk about this problem. We have a variable that is a. Now this variable is nothing but your integer or the number array in which or you have 2, 3 and 4 as the numbers or elements in the array. Now you are trying to access a of 2. So we know that if you talk about array, so here we have 2, 3 and then there's a space, that is this value has not been defined yet. And now we have this array as indexing starts from 0 and we are trying to access that element. So what will be the value? Will it be 0? Will it be empty? Or will it throw an error? Or will it be undefined? So whenever you are not declaring any variables, like let's suppose you have declared a and you are not defining it, you are not initializing it, what will be the value of this? It will be undefined. So same thing happens over here, it will be undefined. As you haven't defined it here, you have just declared it, so it will be undefined. So the correct option is undefined. Okay, declaring variable without initializing it, that means it's an undefined situation. While accessing it, the output is undefined. Okay. Now let's move on to the next question. So this is again an array in which we have 3 elements, that is 2, 3 and 4, right? Indexing starts from this and then you are trying to push 5 in this array. So these are inbuilt methods that you can use with arrays. So when you're trying to push 5 in the array, so this is the first thing that you're trying to push and then you are unshifting 1. That means you're trying to unshift 1 in this. So there are push, pop, shift, unshift methods that are associated with arrays. So we are pushing 1 element and we are unshifting 1 element, right? So now we want to check what are the elements in this array. So as we all know, whenever we are trying to push this element in this array, it will be always pushed at the end. So 5 will be pushed over here and the size will increase. Now, whenever we are using this unshift operator or unshift method with arrays, it will always insert the value at the beginning of the array. So it will be inserted over here and now the indexing will change. 1 becomes 2, this becomes 3, this becomes 4. So the total length of this array is 5. So as you can see, the output over here, it will be 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. So this is the output. Push adds the element at the end, unshift adds the element at the beginning and vice versa. Pop deletes the element at the end and shift removes the element or deletes the element from the beginning. So push and pop for the end and unshift and shift for the beginning. Now let's move on to the next question. We have defined an array in which we have these many elements, 5 elements, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we are using another method that is there, which is splice. And then we are passing in the arguments. That means 1 and 3 are the arguments. That means, as we all know. So basically what happens over here, we have these elements in the array, and this is the indexing, right? Since we are using splice operator, so both of them, this 1 as well as 3, will be inclusive. That means we will be taking both of them into consideration, both of these indexes. So we are saying that splice this array from this position to this position. That means both of them, as I have already shown you guys, both of these indexes are inclusive. They will be included, and replace that with this hello. So we are taking this part into consideration, and then what we are doing, we are replacing this part with hello. Okay, so what it means that when we are trying to access this array, we will get the output as 1, then hello, and then 5. So the output will be this. Is it clear? Right? So whenever we are using the splice method, it is used to replace multiple variables or multiple elements in the array and replace it with some value, or we can remove multiple elements at the same time. Okay, so this is the output. As we can see that we can add new elements in the array from the specified location, right? We have seen, or we can remove them as well, and both these indexes 1 and 3 will be inclusive. Now what will be the output in this case? Right, we have again splice method that we are using, and both of these will be inclusive, and we are not replacing it with some other value. As I told you already, that we can either replace the values or we can delete them. So in this case, we haven't replaced it with some value. So from 2 to 4, all these elements will be removed. So the output will be 1 and 5. So we have 1 and 5 as the output. Okay. Now let's talk about this. This time we are not using splice, we are using slice method. Now whenever we are using the slice method on this particular array, which is 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. So these are the indexes. So first let's talk about these indexes. Are these inclusive or exclusive? So when we talk about this slice method that we have over here, both of these, that means in this case, in the splice method, both of these were inclusive, right? In this, 1 is inclusive and 3 is exclusive. Okay, so 1 will be included and this will not be included. 3 is not inclusive. So whenever you are trying to use this slice method, both 1 will be inclusive and 3 will be exclusive, and it helps us to create a new array from the existing array. So this is the array, and we have used this slice method 1 and 3, out of which 1 is inclusive and 3 is not inclusive, right? So we are creating a new array, which means we will be creating a new array in which 2 and 3, both of these will be included, and we are forming a new array that is ARR1. So this ARR1 will contain 2 elements, 2 and 3. As we know, whenever we are using this slice method, it will return an array. So we are printing that array. So what will be the output? 2 and 3. So this is the output, 2 and 3. Now let's talk about this question that we have over here. We have an array that is 1, 2, 3, right? And then we are defining a new array which is empty. And then what we are doing, we are trying to push elements in the array, and at the same time we are using this for each loop over here, and we are multiplying each element by 2. So this is the question. So I have explained it such a way that the answer should be easy, right? Basically what we are doing, we are using a for each loop, and we are traversing to this array that is ARR, and then what we are doing, at the same time we are traversing, and at the same time we are pushing it in the new array, right? So then we are trying to print the value of this new array. So one by one we are traversing it, we are pushing it. So 1 will be multiplied with 2 and it will be pushed in the array. So it will be 2 because 1 multiplied by 2 is 2. Then the next element is there, 2 multiplied by 2 is 4. We are pushing it. Pushing means inserting the element in the array at the end. So at the end is 4. Again 3 and 2, that is 6, pushing it in the array. 4 and 2, 8, pushing it in the array. So output will be 2, 4, 6, 8. So 2, 4, 6, 8. It creates a new copy. That means we are creating a new copy and that we are storing in the new array, right? So we are doing multiple operations here. We are traversing, we are pushing the elements, we are creating a new array, right? So these are the operations that we are performing in this question. Now, as you can see over here, for each loop that we have used, in that we are using one extra push for explicitly adding the elements in the new array, right? Correct? Here we are using this push operation and we are explicitly inserting the array in this inserting the elements in the new array. Is there a better way to do the same thing? Yes. For that we will be using a map. Instead of explicitly pushing those things in the array, right, what we did, and using a for each loop, we have this method which is known as map, and this helps us to do the same thing. Basically, in this we will be traversing through the array elements and multiplying them with the 2. But it is much more easy and we are not using any for each loop. We are not explicitly pushing the elements in the array. We are not creating any. We are having this new array, right? That is all that was there in the earlier case as well. So one by one we are traversing through the elements and we are multiplying them with these elements, right? One by one with the help of this operation. That is multiplying it with 2. So we'll be getting the output as 2, 4, 6, 8. So we are creating a new array, that is, and then we are doing some manipulation as well. For each loop is not used, but it does not require any extra push as well. We are not explicitly pushing the elements in the array explicitly. It is done automatically, right, with the help of this map method. Now, what will be the output in this case? We have this variable a defined as 10, right? We have this variable a that is equal to 10. Now what we are doing, we are trying to do an operation which is pre-increment and post-increment. So how does pre-increment work? Pre-increment works that it says that first increment the value and then assign it. But what happens in post-increment? Post-increment says first assign the value, then do the increment, right? So we have both of these used over here. So what will be the output in this case? So as you can see that we are trying to print it at the same time. So whatever will be the value, it will be throughout this, basically throughout this operation, right? Throughout this statement. So as you can see that we have this 10, right? So as you can see over here, we have this pre and post increment. Pre means first assign the value and then increment, and prefix means first increment and then assign the value. As you can see over here, we have this value as 10. We are doing a pre-increment. So that means it will increment the value first and then assign it. But over here, it is a post increment, right? So it will be first assigned. So the value will be assigned is this, which is nothing but 11, which is the current value. So when we are trying to print it, so the output will be 22, 11 plus 11. But when you check the value of a over here, it will be 12 in the next statement, okay? Because of the post increment. Now let's talk about this question over here, which is somewhat related to the earlier question, wherein I told you what will be the value of a. As I have already explained this, the value of a will be 12. Right? Because of the post increment that happened in the next step. Now let's talk about this. So we have this variables, that is, we have a variable a and we have a variable b which is equal to 2. Now what we are doing a left shift for this 8 with 2. That means we are saying 8 left shift by 2. Whenever we are talking about this left shift, that means this number 8 will be converted into a binary. We are not talking about the preceding zeros and the unsigned bit, right? So we have something like this 1 0 0, that is 1 2 4 8, right? So we have this value and it is converted into binary. Now we are doing a left shift. That means earlier this was the number and we are shifting this 2 positions on the left side. So it will go here and then it will go here. So the new value will be 1, 0, and this will be obviously 0, and this will be 0, 0, 0. So this will be the new value, right? And if you talk about the value of this A, what will be the value of this A? It will be obviously 8, then 16 and 32. So the value will be 32 and the answer is 32. Now if you are thinking about what are these, this is nothing but 2 raised power 0, 2 raised power 1, 2 raised power 2, 2 raised power 3, because we are talking about binary, right? So then we have 2 raised power 4. So this is what 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, and then we have 2 raised power 5, which is 32. Okay, so this will be the value when we are doing a left shift. Now there is a trick to solve this question without using these kind of things, right? Whenever you are doing a left shift, it is similar to doing A multiplied by 2, that is the binary, right? The binary 2, because at the most you can have either 0 or 1, and then there's the n, which represents the number of shifts. Over here you have 8 into 3, this n is over here 2, so 2 raised power 2 is 4, so 8 into 4 is 32. This is value. Okay, so whenever you are doing a left shift, your number will always increase. So here is the trick that I was talking about. You have over here A, then you have 2 raised power p, which is the value, is the number, and this is the number of times you want to shift. Now here we have another example, which is the right shift. Here, as you can see, we have a number. Again, we will be converting it into binary, so something like this. Now what we are doing, we are shifting it towards the right by 2. So in first shift it will be something like this, in the next shift it will be something like this. So if you talk about this, it will be nothing but 2 raised power 0, 2 raised power 1, which is 1, and 2, the value will be 2. So this will be the answer. But as you can see over here, whenever we are doing a right shift, right, the value always decreases, and it is something like this. It is A into, I'll write it in the same term manner. Earlier it was A into B divided by N, which is nothing but your B over here. It was for the right, left shift, right? Now in the right shift, this happens to be the case. A divided by 2 raised power B. Now let's check it for this example. So you have 8 as B, you have 2, and you have 8 as A, right? And you have B as 2, which is 2 raised power 2, which is 8 divided by 4, which is nothing but 2, correct? So this is the correct option. Whenever you are doing a right shift, right, whenever you're shifting your elements to the right hand side, the value always decreases. So right shift, the value always decreases. Now let's talk about this question. What will be the output of NaN, that is not a number, is equal to not a number? So ideally it should give us the result as true, right? Because we are checking if not a number situation, or when this condition arises, should be equal to a not a number situation, and we are using double equal to sign, right? But the output will be false. Okay, when you are trying to compare the NaN situation with any of these operators, it will always give you the unequal, that is the false output, even including NaN value. That is what we have seen, right? Even if we are comparing it with the help of double equal to sign, NaN is compared with NaN, it will yield us the result as false. We'll see how we can get the correct output in this case. Okay, now let's talk about the next question. When we are using triple equal to sign, do you think that in this case the output will vary? That means, will you get the output as true? No, in this case also you will get the output as false, even if we are using strict equality form, that is this triple equal to sign, right? Again, NaN when compared with double equal to or triple equal to will always yield the result as false. Okay, now if you talk about this question, right, we are checking if positive 0 is equal to negative 0, but we are using a strict form of equality, right? That is this triple equal to. So in this case, it will give you the result as true. Why? Because this is something which is used for standardization of JavaScript, and according to European Computer Manufacturers Association, that is ECMA, right? Any modification or update is drafted. Whenever the updation or modification happens, it is drafted and sent to this committee, and it is by this committee this standardization of JavaScript is maintained. And even if we are using this strict form of equality, we are getting this output as true, right? Which ideally should not happen, because even if we have this plus equal to or minus equal to, they both have the same value. But since we are using this triple equal to sign, that is why we are getting the output as true. We will see how we can rectify this problem and get the correct output in this case as well. Okay, now let's move on to our next question, which is, in this case, now when we are doing object is and we are using this class, along with it we are using this method object is, and now we are checking if plus 0 is equal to minus 0. In this case, it will give us the correct output, which is false, as object is helps us to distinguish between plus 0 and minus 0, which was not the case in earlier situation, right? When we use triple equal to, we got the output as true, but which is not correct, right? So now in this case, we'll get the output as false. Okay, now what about the situation wherein we had that nan equal to nan, or nan triple equal to nan, right? We had this question, right? And both of them yielded the result as false, which shouldn't be, right? So for that, in order to rectify that, we have this question over here, and this helps us to distinguish between this situation, nan equal to nan. So we have this number class over here, and is nan as the method, and whenever we pass, it checks is this whatever is the value over here is, in this case we are sending nan, that is not a number. Please check, is this not a number? In this case, yes it is, so we will get the output as true. Okay, nan is used to check if the parameter is not a number, that is this method. Okay, now what will be the output in this case? Obviously, now since we are passing a string, so this is not a number situation, so we will get the output as false, right? String is not a number, correct? Now what about this case? In this case, we are not using a number class along with is nan, so it just checks if this is a not a number situation, or is this if the parameters passed is a not a number. But in this case, what happens, this will not give us the correct output, as you might be thinking that this will give you the result as false, but no, it will give you the result as true, because is nan will perform when you're not using it along with the class name, that is the number. It will do a type conversion. Now what do you mean by this type conversion, right? It means converting one type into another. That means string will be converted to nan. So that is why you are getting the output as true and not false. Now let's talk about this question. In this question, as you can see, that we have var a equal to 20, and we are doing operation, a bitwise operation in this if condition, and then depending on that we are either printing an even or odd. So what is happening? If we talk about a, which is 20, the binary of this will be nothing but 20. If you have 20 over here divided by 2, you get the remainder as 0, right? And then you divide it again by 2, you get the remainder as 0. Then doing it again, 2 into 2 is 4, remainder is 1. 2 into 1 is 1, and remainder is 0. Now you go from bottom to top, and the output will be 1 0 1 0 0. This is how you do the binary conversion of this number, which is simple, right? 2 raised power 0, 2 raised power 1, 2 raised power 2, 2 raised power 3, and 2 raised power 4. 2 raised power 4 is nothing but 16, and 2 raised power 2 is nothing but 4, which is again equal to 20. You can do it like this as well. Okay, now if you talk about this if condition, right? If I do a bitwise of a, that is 1 0 0, and I do a bitwise of this a with 1, the resultant will be 0, and 0 then is equal to 0. That means we are checking if 0 is equal to 0. and we are only checking the value. Okay, we know how this double equal to sign operates. It only checks the data, not the data type. In this case, it is true, right? The 0 is equal to 0 and the output should have been even, but it is not the case. The output is odd. Now why is this happening? Now let me just erase some part of it. This is happening because, as we know, whenever we have some operations grouped together, like in this case we have the equality operation that we are checking for the equality, and we also have the AND. Now the precedence, if you talk about the precedence of equality is higher than AND. So for that reason, before even calculating this a and 1, we first calculate this 1 equal to 0. Now is 1 equal to 0? No, this would be false. That means we'll be getting the output as 0. And now when we are doing a, that is 10100, a bitwise AND with a false, that means with a 0. So 0 and 0 will yield you a result which is again a false, right? So once you have this condition as false, that means this if will not be this counterpart will not be executed. Now we go into the else part and we print out odd. So you get the output as odd. Is this thing clear? So this is for the reason, and only reason is that first this part will be calculated and then we will do the AND. If we do the vice versa, you will always get the output as even, which is not correct. Okay, so we are doing a bitwise and we got the output as odd. Now let's move on to the next question. We have two variables, a boolean variables this time, a which is true and b which is false. Now in this case we are simply doing a and b. So when we know when both the conditions are true, in that case we will get the output as true when we are doing a logical AND. That means on this side you will be having one condition and on this side you will be having one condition. Since a is true, we go to the b and we check if this b is the condition, in this case it is b, is true or false, which is false. So you get the output as false. Okay, logical operator works if both the statements are correct. In this case it was not the case. Now let's move on to the next question. Now over here we have two variables, a which is 10 and b which is 10. Now this a, the data type of this is, if you talk about the data type, is number, right? And for this it is string. Now we are using this equality sign to check whether a is equal to b. Now we know whenever we are checking with double equal to sign, in that case we only check the data. That means is 10 equal to 10? Yes it is. The data part is equal. The only thing that is not equal is the data type, which we not care when we are using this double equal to. Is this thing clear? Right? So now in this case we will get the output as equal. And now if we check the output, it is equal. And the reason for that is equal to, when you are using double equal to, it only checks the data part of the variables and not the data type. Okay. Now let's move on to the next question. In this question, it is again fairly simple that we are having two variables, a equal to 10 and b equal to 10. Again, the data type of this variable is number and the data type of this variable is a string. Now in this case we are checking if a is triple equal to b. That means in this case we'll be checking if a, that is 10, is triple equal to string 10. Now when we are using this triple equal to sign or the strict form of equality, in this case we'll be checking both the data as well as the data type. Data is matching, but the data type is not matching, so we will get the output as false, and we will not even go here. That is the beauty of using logical AND. We only check the second condition if the first condition is true. In this case, it is false. So we'll not go to here and we'll not check it. So if we have exhausted this part because this is false, and we go into the else part, which is not equal to, we'll print it out. You see, the output is not equal to, because logical operator, that is this AND logical operator, checks if both the statements are true or are correct. Okay. Now let's check the next question. In this case, we are having two variables, right? Again, A and B. A is 10, the data type of A is number, B is 10, the data type of B is string. We are checking if A is equal to B, right? In this case, what we are doing, we are again checking, right? 10 is equal to the string 10. Now, obviously, it will give you the result as false, which we have already seen. But what happens in this case, we are using a OR operator. That means no matter if this condition is false, we will still go ahead and check if this condition is true or not. That means if this condition would have been true, it will not go here because this whole condition is true. But if it is false, it will definitely go ahead and check if A is not equal to B, and it will check if this condition is true or false, right? Now in this case, what is A? A is 10. What is B? B is 10. But both of them are equal. But we are checking for the not. That means if we have to see only if they will give us the result as false, then it will be true. But in this case, the result is true. Hence, this condition is false. Now, this condition is also false. This condition is also false. So both of these conditions are false. Even if we are using logical OR operator, we'll go into the next part, that is the counterpart of if, and we will print not equal to. And logical OR checks for both the statements if they are true or not, which we did. Now let's talk about this question. Here what we are doing, we have a for loop, and in that for loop we have a var. That means we have defined a variable with the help of var keyword. First we are looping around I, that means I is 0, and then we are looping around and then we are trying to access it here. Now whenever we are using the var keyword, like other traditional languages, if we have defined a keyword over in this loop, that means this is a block scope variable, right? This var, this I would have been a block scope variable, right? And when we are trying to access it here, it would have thrown us the error in other programming languages, right? Or whenever we are creating a variables with the help of var keyword, the scope becomes global and we can access them over here. So the error is out of the picture. So now let's try to debug it. We have a variable I, which is having a value 0. Now what we are doing, we are incrementing it over here as well as over here. So first time around, this will not be executed, right? Because of the for loop. Now what we are doing, we are incrementing it inside. That means in the next step, it will be incremented to 1. Now it goes back to this condition and it increments it again, which is 2. And now what it does, it checks for the condition, that is I less than 5. Yes, it is. Now it goes back inside again and it increments it. The for loop increments it again and it checks the condition is 4 less than 5. Yes, it is. It goes inside, it increments it. And then this goes to the for loop again, increments it. Now it checks, is 6 less than 5? No, it is not. It is out of this for loop and we are trying to access it over here, which we absolutely can because of the var keyword that we have used to define a variable, that is this I. So the output will be, what is the value of I? It is currently 6. So the value of I is 6 and 6 will be our output because of the global scope of var. Now let's move on to the next question, which is the same thing, but this time around we are using a let keyword. Now this is something that we wish not to do because in other traditional programming languages we are comfortable with this thing, that if we are defining a variable inside this for loop, we don't want to access it outside because that is something which we can't do, right, in other programming languages because of the block scope of this variable. Now, whenever you are defining your keywords with the help of let, and inside this you have defined your variable I with the help of let keyword, it makes this I a block scope variable. Okay, now even though we are doing the same thing, but when we are trying to access it over here, it will throw us an error saying that the I is not being defined. Why? Because the scope was over here. In this block, the scope of I was there. But once we are out of this block, this variable is undefined or undeclared. You will get the error and it will say scope of let, that is this keyword, let keyword is a block level, right? And the error that you will be getting is the variable is not being defined. Now let's move on to our next question, which is fairly simple. We just want this function which is over here, which is a function declaration. We want to convert this function declaration into function expression, right? We have this function and the name of this function is happy, and we are saying that console, we are just printing out I am grateful. That's it. Now to convert it into a function expression, we just name this function as name. This is optional, okay? And now what we are doing, we are assigning it to a variable that is happy, right? And you see with the help of var keyword and the name of the function, then this name is optional, and then we are printing the same message, that is I am grateful, and this is the function expression for the same function. And now when we want to call it, you just name happy. That's it. This you cannot call it with the help of this because this is optional, and you cannot call it. It will say that this has not been defined. Okay, now let's talk about IIFE or IFE. It stands for immediately invoked function expressions. Now we have already seen how to declare a function declaration and how we converted our function declaration into function expression. Now it is a kind of a function expression, but these are immediately invoked. As you can see over here, the syntax is function, then the parameter, the name of the function which was optional in function expression as well, and then we have the parenthesis, and then we have the block of this function, and then what we are doing, we are calling it immediately with the help of these two parentheses at the end. Now the above is a kind of a function expression, as it is not starting with function keyword. Obviously, whenever we have a function which is not starting with a function keyword like we have in function declaration, that is known obviously as a function expression. Now it is not hoisted because we don't have a function in front of it like we have those in function declarations. Now this is very important, that our immediately invoked function expressions, that is IFE, are not hoisted. No explicit calling for IFE is required. We don't have to call like we call other functions like happy we did in the earlier case. We call that function and we have the output as I am grateful. In this case, whenever we are declaring it, obviously it will be invoked at that same time. Now let's move on to the next question and things will be much clearer. So this is the question. What will be the output in this case? We have a function which is obviously an IFE, immediately invoke function expression. As you can see that there is no function keyword, so it is a function expression. We have this function, and then the name of the function is obviously optional, which was in the case of function expression. In this we don't require. Now it is having two arguments, a and b, and here as you can see that at the time we are calling it, obviously this is something when this is the syntax, right? And we are passing in two arguments, and this is a, this is b. So, and then what we are doing, we are just printing out this message and we are multiplying and adding 1 to it. So since this multiplication has higher precedence, so this will execute first. That means 10 into 5 will be executed first. And in this case, then we are adding it to 1. Okay. So in this case, the output will be 51. Or a better way of writing this, since we are not using these parameters, we can use them. Let me just erase them. So instead of 10 and 5 that we are writing directly, we could have written here as a and b. Then it would have make much more sense. So when we are doing a into b, that means it will be replaced by 10 multiplied by 5, that is 50, and then adding 1 to it, that is 51, and 51 is your correct option, which is the first option. So 51 is the first option, and we have invoked function expressions, right? Immediately invoked function expressions. Okay. Now let's move on to our next question, which is we have this object over here, which is animal. And in this, we have defined it with the help of let keyword. And in this, we have two properties, name and eat. And then what we are doing, we are calling this eat method with the help of this object, obviously, which is animal. And we are calling this method, which is a function. And we are passing in two arguments. One is apple and another is 5. Now, what will be the output? Since we are calling it directly, right? We are calling this method eat directly, so this will be called, and we will be printing here I, then which obviously here is a space, then space, and then this dot name. This refers to the current object. Now the current object is animal, and we are accessing the name property, which is again an animal. So we will be getting I animal. Then there's this there will be eating, which is a space over here, so that is why we'll be getting a space over here. Eating, again a space over here, right? And then b, we are accessing this b, which is nothing but your argument that you have passed already, right? So b is 5, and then again a space over here, as you can see, which we have added over here, right? And then what we are doing, we are trying to access a, which is apple. This is how you call your property with the help of object. The object is animal, and the output that you will be getting is I animal eating 5 apple. This is I animal eating 5 apples, and this, that is the keyword that we use, refers to the current object, and functions we have used and we have passed in the arguments as well. Okay. Now let's move on to the next question. So this is the continuation of the previous question. As you can see over here, we are using animal, that is the earlier object, and then what we are doing, we are calling the eat method. Now we are using this call, and then we have this human, which is this object over here, which is having only one property, that is name. It does not have eat, but still we are calling this method. How we can do that? This is possible only because we are using this call, and call is used to borrow methods. Now what we are doing, we are borrowing this method, that is eat, from the animal object, and we are calling it so that human can use it. So now human is using it, and the arguments, that two arguments that we had earlier, that is, let me just go back to the earlier question. So as you can see, let me just clear it again. So as you can see that we have two arguments over here, and then we called this. Similarly, we are calling this for this human, and we are passing in two arguments. So it will be treated as if human also had that eat method, which is having two arguments a and b. And now the output will be as expected, which is I this dot name. Now this dot name refers to the current object. Now the current object in this case is human. Now, and that we are accessing the name property, which is human. So the output will be I human eating what? The B was 2, and then A was oranges in this case, right? Oranges and 2. So the output will be I human eating 2 oranges, and call is used to borrow the methods. How cool is that, right? So you were not having any eat method in the human object, but still you were able to call it with the help of this keyword, that is call, and it is used to borrow methods. Now let's move on to the next question. There is another way with which you can borrow methods, that is with the help of apply. And instead of passing your arguments separately, in this we can pass our arguments in the form of array, and it will be acting same as call. Okay, still you will be getting the same output as I human eating 2 orange. So this is the output, I human eating 2 oranges, and apply is used to borrow methods, but parameters are sent in the form of array. Simple. Now let's talk about this question. As we have already seen the call and apply, now let's talk about one more way, which is bind. As you can see over here, we have That is, we have an object. In that we have two properties, one is name and another is eat. Now we have another object which is human, and in this we have only one property, that is name. Now what we are doing over here, we are doing the same thing. We are borrowing methods, but this time we are using bind. Now when we are using bind, in this case it will return this function, right, eat, which we are binding with the human, and we are storing it in human eat. Now this human eat is nothing but it contains the same definition, which is console log dot whatever is the definition of this function. It will be treated like this, but this time around we can use human eat. As you can see over here, we are calling human eat with two arguments. That means you'll be calling this function over here, this time with this name, and we will be printing I. Now this dot name. Now this dot name refers to the current object. Now current object is not animal, it's human, because we binded it with human, right? So I human eating 10 mango. This will be the output. I human eating 10 mango. Bind is used to borrow methods, and it returns the function definition, which was this. In this case, this was the function definition, and we stored it in this human eat, which we can use later, which we saw, right? Human eat we used later, and we passed in two arguments, just like we have for this object, which is animal. Now let's talk about this question. We have over here, we have an object which is having two properties. One is name, another is sing. Now in this sing, we are first trying to access the object. Now here we call the sing obj.sing. So the current object is, we will be getting an output as a, then the current object, which is this, which will be having two properties, name and sing, which is a function. Okay. Now what about this? In this function, we are having another function expression, right? And we are calling it inside this function. And we are trying to access the whatever is this function, or whatever is the object that is calling this function. In this case, when you deal with JavaScript, it doesn't matter where your function is written. It is dependent on who is calling that function. In this case, you will be getting the output as B, but it is not that this object is calling this function. That is, this object is calling this function. No, it is the window object that is calling this function. Okay, the window object is calling this function, even though it is inside this sing, which is called by this object. That is your obj. So the output will be A, that is the object that is calling this, which is having name and sing method, but B is called by the window object. Now in order to get the output that this function should be called with this object, we have to bind it. Now second function is not binded, and that is why we are getting the window as the second object that is calling the second function that is inside the sing. Now how can you rectify it? This time around, we'll be using something which is known as arrow function, which we don't have to bind explicitly like we did in the earlier case wherein we were binding eat method. Arrow functions are implicitly binded. We don't have to explicitly bind these arrow functions. Now in this case, as you can see over here, we are having this another function, which is a function expression, and this is an arrow function, and in this we are printing B and this. Now this time around, this B refers to the current object. So this another function will be giving you again this name, and which is Sam, and then this function which is sing. Okay, this will be binded to this object. So that is why you will be getting the output as like this, which is expected. Now this is the output that we got, right? So to make this lexically bound, we used arrow functions, right? And this function that we did over here, we don't have to explicitly bind it. We used arrow function, and this was binded with the current object, which is obj, right? And we don't have to explicitly use the function keyword as well. Now let's move on to the next question. What is an object and how can you create one? So basically object is nothing but an instance of a class, or it is the physical entity of a class, and we can either use a new keyword to create objects and allocate the memory in the heap, or there is another way with which you can directly create objects, which is like this var name, and then you have two properties inside that object, right, which we have already seen, right? And we have been using this way to create our objects. We can create object, it calls the constructor of the class when we are using the new keyword, and in the coming slides we will be seeing more and more how to create objects with the help of new keyword. Now let's move on to the next question, which is what is encapsulation? So encapsulation is nothing but when you have this class keyword that is used to wrap up your data. That means in your class student, you have a constructor, which we will talk about. Then you have this method, which is attendance. And then how you create your objects, you will say var Adam, and you will create with the help of new keyword. You will be using the constructor that you have defined over here, and you are passing in two arguments, that is 23 and Adam, which is roll number and name. And then you're calling your method, which is this method attendance, with the help of this object, which is Adam. Okay, so encapsulation is nothing but wrapping your data and functions. This is your function. Okay, and here the properties and functions of the object are placed together. So now you have your properties, if there are any, and these are your properties, right? Roll number and name, and the attendance is your function or method, are wrapped up together, and they will be treated as one object. Okay, so this is the class student, and we have used this new keyword to create the object. Now what is a constructor? As we have already seen, the constructor is nothing but it is a special function that is used to allocate memory at the time of initializing the objects, and it starts with the keyword constructor. As we have already seen in the previous example, it started with the keyword that is constructor, right? And then we can have either a parameterized constructor or without parameters. So in this case, the parameters will be always optional. You can have either like this, the constructor and this, or you can have A and B or roll number and whatever is the case. Okay, so you can have parameters as well. And the simple syntax is that you will be having a constructor which is used to initialize the objects. Okay, and JavaScript implicitly provides a default constructor if you are not having one. Okay, if there is no constructor defined in your class, don't worry, it will be defined implicitly. And when new is encountered, it calls the constructor. As you can see over here, whenever it encountered this new keyword, it called this constructor, which is over here. Okay, now let's move on to the next question. So we have over here a class fruit, which is having one constructor. In that we have two properties, name and color. We are setting them up, we are initializing them up. Then we have a grow method, which is in that grow method, what we are doing, we are saying that this dot color fruit growing. This is the message that we have, and this dot color refers to this color that we have over here. Now in the apple class, that means we are having another class which is apple, which is extending the fruit. So basically we are using the concept of inheritance here. Okay, we are extending the fruit, and in this we have again a constructor, right? We have again a constructor which is of apple, but this time around we are calling the constructor of earlier class. That means this constructor has been called with the help of this super keyword, and we are passing in these two arguments in that super. As you can see over here, in that we are passing name and color, which will be set to this constructor, name and color. Okay, and then we are setting up the type, which is one extra argument that we have in the apple class, that is also being set. Now in this we have another method that is eat, which is basically just trying to print this dot name eating. Now this dot name refers to this name. Okay, now what will be the output? Okay, so we are calling grow method and we are calling eat method, and we are creating this object tasty apple with the help of this apple class, and we are passing in these three arguments. Now let's try to debug this program. Let's erase everything. Let's erase everything on the previous slide as well. This is something which is a little bit tricky, but yeah, you will get it. So you're creating an object of this class, that is apple, right? And so you're calling the constructor of this class, and you're passing in tasty apple, red and big. So you have the name as tasty apple, red and big. Okay. Now, what happens? Once this constructor is called, right, you are using inside this a super keyword which is calling the constructor, and it should be the first line because the initialization takes place in the first line of the constructor. So you need to have this super keyword if you're calling any parent class objects. Parent class. If you're calling the constructor of parent class, this super has to be in the first line. And you're passing in two arguments, which is name and color. So this TA, that is tasty apple, and red will be passed to the constructor, to this constructor. So you have tasty apple and color as red, and they are being set with name as tasty apple and color as red. Done. Coming back to this. Now you also have the type, which is big, and this type will be set to big. This is the thing that happened only with this line of code. Okay, you call the constructor of both the classes. Now what you are doing, with the help of this tasty apple, you are calling the grow method, which is in the parent class. Now what happens in this parent class method? You are saying this dot color. This refers to the current object, which is this fruit, and fruit is red. The color of fruit is red. Red fruit is growing. This is what you will be getting output, right? Coming back to this, red fruit is growing, and then you are saying, you are calling the eat method, which is this, and you're saying this dot name. This dot name refers to the current object. Now the current object has been already set, which is the name, that is tasty apple, eating. So red fruit is growing, tasty apple is eating. We are implementing the concepts of inheritance. Okay. So guys, if you're not able to understand these concepts, we already have a course, the 10-hour course on YouTube, which is absolutely free, which is on JavaScript, in order to get hold of these terms if it is difficult for you to understand. Okay. So here what we did, we simply implemented inheritance, and we just called two functions. One was grow and one was eat. The grow was present in the parent class, and eat was present in the child class, and we simply printed out messages which we already have set the arguments with the help of this constructor. Okay. Now let's talk about the next question, which is what is polymorphism? If you talk about polymorphism, it consists of two words, poly and morphism. Poly means many and morphism means forms. We can have multiple forms when we talk about polymorphism of a single instance or of a single object. We can have multiple forms. Okay. And it is broadly divided into two categories, which is overloading and overriding. When we talk about polymorphism, it means to act differently on different inputs. When your input changes, your output will change. And whenever your input is changing, it will act differently, right? That means your output will also change. Okay. So it is broadly divided into two categories. One by one, we'll be covering both of these categories. Okay. Now let's talk about first, what is method overloading? And this is the question. Okay. So method overloading is nothing but, in JavaScript, when we talk about JavaScript, it does not support the classical method overloading. Okay, which is that you will be overloading your methods. It will allow you to have same function name, but it will consider only the last implementation of the functions, which is very tricky and which is not something the classical method overloading will follow. Okay, that means let's talk about this method overloading function. So you have this question over here. As you can see over here, you have two functions in this. So you have a class which is named as father, and in that you have one constructor, and you're setting up the name, right? In this you have a display method which is console.log I am, and then you are trying to access this .name. So this is where your overloading comes into picture. That means you are having two methods, one without argument and one with arguments. So to act differently on different inputs. Now, depending on the input, that is the argument in this case, your output will change. But since it does not follow classic overloading, right? Classic overloading, let's see what happens. So you have this vehicle over here, and in this, I'm saying I am driving vehicle, which is this argument. Now, whenever we are creating an object, right? of father, which is Alex, and we are passing in the argument as Alex. So this constructor will be called and name will be set to Alex. That is this first step. Done. Now what we are doing, we are calling display, which is this method will be called and we are passing in the argument, that is bike. So I am saying that I am driving and the vehicle is bike. So the output will be I am driving and the vehicle is I am driving bike. Okay. Now alex.display. Whenever you're calling this function, that is display, in traditional overloading, this should have been called and you should have got the output as I am, and this dot name refers to the current object and the name is Alex. So this is the output that you should get it. I am driving bike. So now what happens in this, when we are calling this display method again, that this second display method, in traditional system or traditional overloading, we might be thinking, okay, this function will be called, right? But that is not the case. This function is not present at all. And whenever we are calling this function, the next function, again, this function will be called. And this time around, I'll be getting an output as I am driving. Since we don't have any argument over here, so this vehicle will be treated as undefined. And we will be getting as an output as I am driving bike, I am driving undefined. This is the overloading that JavaScript does. It does not follow traditional overloading. It follows that whatever is the last implementation there will be considered, and this will be called always. Even if you have an argument, even if you have a display function without arguments, don't think that this second function call will call this. No, it will always call this. Even if you have arguments, if you have 2 arguments, if you have 3 arguments, and let's suppose if you have one more argument over here, which is having 2 arguments, let's suppose A and B, and then you are printing console log hi, and then you have here alex.display and you are passing in 2 arguments, A and B. What happens in that case? You just check it out, okay? See what happens. It will always take this one into consideration, okay? Cool. So this is the output, okay? So I am driving bike, I am driving undefined, and we implemented method overloading. Now let's talk about method overriding. What is method overriding? So when you talk about method overriding, it is a runtime polymorphism. As we already have discussed this, what is polymorphism? Poly means many and morphism means forms. So it happens during runtime. Earlier, when we saw overloading, we talked about compile time polymorphism. Here what happens, if a child wants to override the parent's method, right? Let's suppose there's a parent class and then you have a child class. Now this child class wants to override this method, which is over here. Let's suppose here we have a method which is A, and this A method is also present in child class. Now defining it over here, what it does, it overrides the implementation of parent class method. Now how we can do it is by having exactly the same signature with its implementation. Now what do you mean by signature? It should have the same name as A and A. It should have the same number of arguments as what was there in the parent class. So this is what is method overriding. Now let's move on to our next question. Here we have a class, and in that class is father. In that class we have 2 methods or 2 properties are there. One is a display method, another is an address method. Now we have another class over here which is child class, and it extends father. And in this child class, what we are doing, we are again having this method which is same as it is. The signature is same as we have over here, the of display. So same signature. Now we have this SAM object over here, right? And it looks for address method, which is present in the parent class. So address can be called. Why? Because we are extending father, the father class over here, right? Now here the address will be called from the parent class. Now what happens when we call sam.display? Would it go for this implementation or would it go for this implementation? That is implementation 2. This is implementation 1. Now obviously it will go for the first implementation. Why? Because we are using the concept of method overriding over here, which is also known as runtime polymorphism. right? So this overriding when happens, it will just print I am child, and for the address it will say I live in India. So this is your output. I live in India because we are first calling the address method, which is present in the parent class, then I am child, which is present in the child class. So this is how you implement method overriding. Now let's see this question. In this question, we have a try and a catch block. And in this, we have a console. We are printing A, although we haven't defined it. And then we have a catch block in which we are catching the error. And then we are printing this message, we got an error, and then the error, what is the type of the error. So as we can see that clearly A has not been defined. So we will get an error and catch will catch it, and we'll get this message. So the output will be, we got an error, reference error, A is not being defined. So try block contains the code which might throw an error, right? So this code may or may not throw an error. And if it throws an error, there should be a corresponding catch block which will catch that error and print the error. Okay. Now let's move on to the next question. In this question, as we can see, we have a try block and a catch block, and in this try block we again have that same A which has not been defined, and then we have the statement over here. What will be the output? If you are thinking that this will be printed or this will be on your console, it is not correct. So whatever is the line of code after this try block, right, after this statement wherein we will get an error that this A has not been defined, we'll go to the catch block and we will never come back to this statement and print it. Okay, so the output will be again the same. We got an error and the reference error is A is not being defined. Okay, so do not keep any statement after the statement that might throw an error, that is in the try block. Once the exception is thrown, control gets passed to catch block. Now, what will be the output in this case? We have a try block and then we have this statement over here and then we have the catch block. So again, A has not been defined, so it will throw an error, but it will look for catch. If catch is not present, it will look for finally, or if both are present, then there's a different scenario, right? So it will go for catch and then finally. But since neither catch block, neither finally block is available, so this will throw you an error saying uncaught syntax error, missing catch or finally block after try. That means after the try block. So try block must end with one of the catch blocks. There can be multiple catch blocks, or there should be a finally block, right? And there should not be any statement in between try and catch. That was the case in here, right? So we had the statement and that is why we got an error. Okay. Now let's move on to our next question, which is try and then we don't have parentheses. Earlier we were using those parentheses wherein we were having that parameter error and then we were printing it. But over here we don't have any parentheses, right? So we have a try block and then the catch block. Will this throw an error? No, it will not throw, because after ES10, catch parameters were optional and we just have this message that is we got an error, and that is what we have printed over here. Okay, let's talk about the next question, which is we have a try block, we have a catch block, and we have a finally block. Now obviously A has not been defined, so it will go to the catch block. It will print this message we got an error, and then should it print this block, that finally block? Yes, it will be always printed, or whatever is in the finally block will be always executed. Okay, no matter if there is an error or not. So let's suppose if there would have been no error, let's suppose you have you wrote hello over here and you printed it, so there is no error, so catch will not be executed. It will go to the finally block and print it. But since there is an error in this case, so it will go to the catch block, it will print we got an error, and then it will print our program has ended, that is program ended. So we got an error, program ended. Okay, so finally block will contain the code that no matter what will happen, it will still get executed. It might contain some code of freeing the resources, closing files, etc. Finally block will execute no matter what. Okay, usually what we keep in this finally block are our resources which we want to free, or closing our files, etc. right? So with this we are at the end of this tutorial, and I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and we implemented a lot of things and we learned a lot of new concepts, and all the very best for your interview. Thank you so much. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, I want to request you to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so that you don't miss out on any new updates on video releases from Great Learning. If you enjoyed this video, show us some love and like this video. Knowledge increases by sharing, so make sure you share this video with your friends and colleagues. Make sure to comment on this video any queries or suggestions, and I will respond to your comments.